Yo, this is my chocolate factory. Consider me fucking Willy Wonka. I am the dictator of freestyle rapping. This is a dictatorship. Consider me fucking Hitler, the dictator of freestyle rapping. Industry, technology, and commerce can thrive only as long as an idealistic national community offers the necessary preconditions, and these do not lie in material egoism, but in a spirit of sacrifice and joyful renunciation. I respect my father, but I love my mother. A strong man is mightiest alone. Idealism does not represent a superfluous expression of emotion, but in truth it has been, is, and will be the premise for what we designate as human culture. Without his idealistic attitude, all even the most dazzling faculties of the intellect will remain mere intellect, just like outward appearance, without inner value, and never create the forced up purest idealism is unconsciously equivalent to the deepest knowledge. Any philosophy, whether of a religious or political nature, and sometimes the dividing line is hard to determine, fights less for of a negative destruction of the opposing ideology than for of a positive promotion of its own. Hence, its struggle is less defensive than offensive. It therefore has the advantage even in determining the goal, since this goal represents the victory of its own idea, while conversely, it is hard to determine when the negative aim of the destruction of a hostile doctrine may be regarded as achieved and assured. For this reason alone, the philosophy's offensive will be more systematic and also more powerful than the defensive against the philosophy, since here too, as always, the attack and not the defiance makes the decision. The fight against the spiritual power with methods of violence remains defensive, however, until the sword becomes a support, herald of, and a disseminator, the disseminator of a new spiritual doctrine. Sparta must be regarded as the first Volkisk state. The exposure of the sick, weak, deformed children and short bear destruction was more decent and, in truth, 1,000 times more human than the rest insanity of our day, which preserves the most pathological subject. Don't let what other people think stop you from doing the things you love. The amount of money that is in your bank at the time of your death is that extra work you did which wasn't necessary. There is a better chance of seeing a camel pass through the eye of a needle than of seeing a really great man discovered through an election. Or stop rapping. There is a better chance of seeing a camel pass through the eye hole of a needle than of seeing a really great man discovered through an election. All great movements are popular movements. They are the volcanic eruptions of human passions of and emotions stirred into activity by the ruthless goddess and distress, or by the torch of the spoken word cast into the midst of the people. Conscience is a Jewish invention. Secular schools can never be tolerated because such a school has no religious instruction, and a general moral instruction without a religious foundation is built on air. Consequently, all character training and religion must be derived from faith. We need believe in people. Purple, snapple, razzle, dazzle, shizzle, my nizzle, bedazzle. It is more difficult to undermine faith than knowledge. Love succumbs to change less than to respect. Hatred is more durable than aversion, and all the times the driving force of the most important changes in this world has been found less in scientific knowledge of animating the masses, but rather in fanaticism dominating them, and hysteria which drove them forward. It is the press above all which wages a positively fanatical and slanderous struggle, tearing down everything which can be regarded as a support of a national independence, cultural elevation, and the economic independence of the nation. God and beast, that is what our world is made of. Winning without problem is just victory, but winning with lots of trouble creates history. Basically, National Socialism and Marxism are the same thing. Whenever human activity is directed exclusively to the service of the instinct for self-preservation, it is called theft or usury, or robbery or burglary, etc. My feeling as a Christian points me to my Lord and Savior as a fighter. It points me to the man who once in loneliness, surrounded only by a few followers, recognized these for what they were and summoned men to fight against them, and who God's truth was greatest not as a sufferer but as a fighter, and boundless love as a Christian and as a man. I read through the passage which tells us how the Lord at last rose in his might and seized the scourge to drive out of the temple the brood of vipers and adders. How terrific was his fight against a poison today. After 2,000 years, with deepest emotion, I recognize more profoundly than ever before the fact that it was for this that he had to shed blood, his blood upon the cross. The average person has the most fear of death, and in reality thinks more rarely about it. The most prominent one occupies himself with it most persistently, but nevertheless fears it the least. The one who lives blindly day to day, sinning away only to sink down before the grim reaper, but other carefully observes his approach, but then looks him in the eye, calm and composed. I know people who read interminably, book after book from page to page, and yet I should not call them well-read people. Of course they know an immense amount, but their brain seems incapable of assorting and classifying the material which they have gathered from books. They have not faculty of distinguishing between what is useful and useless in a book, so that they may retain the former in their minds, and if possible skip over the latter while reading it. If that be not possible, then when once read, throw it overboard as useless ballast. Reading is not an end in itself, but a means to an end. Its chief purpose is to help towards filling in the framework which is made up of the talents and capabilities that each individual possesses. Thus, each one procures for himself implements and materials necessary for the fulfillment of his calling in life, no matter whether this be the elementary task of earning one day's daily bread, or a calling that responds to a higher human aspirations, such as the first purpose of reading, and the second purpose is to give general knowledge of the world in which we live. In both cases, however, the material which one has acquired through reading must not be stored up in the memory on a plan that corresponds to be successive chapters of the book, but each little piece of knowledge thus gained but must be treated as if it were a little stone to be inserted into a mosaic, so that it finds its proper place among all the other pieces and particles that help to form a general world picture in the brain of the reader. Otherwise, only a confused jumble of chaotic notions will result from all this reading. That jumble is not merely useless, but it also tends to make the unfortunate possessor of it conceited, for he seriously considers himself a well-educated person and thinks that he understands something of life. He believes that he has acquired knowledge, whereas the truth is that every increase in such knowledge draws him more and more away from real life, until he finally ends up in some sanitarium or takes to politics and becomes a parliamentary deputy. Such a person never succeeds in turning his knowledge to practical account when the opportune moment arrives, for his mental equipment is not ordered with a view to meeting the demands of everyday life. His knowledge is stored in his brain as a literal transcript of the books he has read. I'm spitting this off the top of my head in the order of succession in which he has read them, and if fate should one day call upon him to use some of his book knowledge for certain practical ends in life, that very call will have to name the book and give the number of the page noodle himself. Poor noodle himself would never be able to find the spot where he gathered the information now called for. But if the page is not mentioned at the critical moment, the widely read intellectual find himself in a state of hopeless embarrassment and a high state of agitation. He searches for analogs, cases, and it is almost a dead certainty that he will finally deliver the wrong prescription. A man who possesses the art of correct reading will instinctively and immediately perceive everything which in his opinion is worth permanently remembering, either because it is suited to his purpose or generally worth knowing. The art of reading as of learning, and this to retain essential, to forget the non-essential. Stalin is one of the most extraordinary figures in world history, says Hitler off the top of me. He began as a small clerk, and he has never stopped being a clerk. Stalin owes nothing to rhetoric. He governs from his office thanks to the bureaucracy that obeys this. Every nod and gesture is striking that Russian propaganda and criticism it makes of us always holds itself within certain limits. Stalin, that cunning Caucasian, is apparently quite ready to abandon European Russians if he thinks that a failure to solve their problems would cause him to lose everything. Let everybody think Stalin might reconquer Europe from the Urals. It is as if I were installed in Slovakia and could set out from there to reconquer the reach. This is the catastrophe that will cause the loss of the Soviet Empire. Rapping dictator of freestyle, but the dictator freestyle rapper. Forever, the forever dictator freestyle rapper.